the second elected president of Mexico, Vicente Guerrero, who abolished slavery in Spain and Mexico, he would be considered black. So we are the only country that trips on that bogus stuff.
Once again, we're here with Dr. Carl Blunt, and the theme today, I would say, is handling history, right? Handling history. How do you handle history? And Dr. Blunt, there's an old quote, man. It's an African proverb, and it says that until the lion has a historian, the tales of the hunt will glorify the hunter. And as you know better than anybody, when you start looking at history, a lot of history is sanitized, it's whitewashed, it's forgotten, it's pushed down, it's suppressed. And I want you to talk about, the problem with history that has traditionally been taught in schools. You grew up in a different era than Burf and I grew up. And I'm sure that there's a lot of similarities, but I'm sure that there's a lot of differences. And so I just want you to just elaborate on the problem with history that's being taught in schools.
Okay, will do. But you should mention that. I was telling some students the other day, when I was in school, history was just given to you, shoved down your throat. Columbus discovered America in 1492, write it down, memorize it's gonna be on the test. If you said, I got a question, don't you challenge me? Yeah. Students nowadays can challenge the teachers, do various things. My thing is, you do your research. My curriculum is called The Color of History. Why? Because in US history, I don't believe in black history. History is history. Yeah. US history cannot be confined or defined by one color, but all colors can define US history. We are the most diverse country in the world, and just about every country on the planet has added or influenced U.S. history. So that's number one. Number two, the teachers don't really know their history. And what is history? History, what are elements of history? It's a chronological tales of events. How do you tell things chronologically? You have to be accurate, which most history is not right now. Yeah. You have to be truthful, which is not really going on. And you have to use all your resources, not just cherry pick parts of history. So when I was in school, as I mentioned, there it is, you write it down, you do it. I got in trouble because, I'm a Catholic, so I'm not a biblical scholar. So we didn't have to read the Bible when I was coming up. But I'm just goofing around one day, said the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden. Let me just find out where it is. So I'm doing some research at the library, bro. Wasn't a cell phone, wasn't a laptop then.
Dewey Decimal System.
Dewey Decimal System.
What they call that?
Man, so for me, the reason history appeals to me, because I had to catch 2 buses to go to the library in San Francisco. The 24 to Visadero, transfer to 5 McAllister, Saturday morning. I wanted to get there early so I can get back and go to the park and play. So 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm on the bus. So I'm like, how am I gonna make this work for me? So I'm thinking, I'm an explorer. I'm on a journey. I'm getting this bus, I'm getting that bus. I get downtown San Francisco, it's like almost 10 o'clock, downtown's waking up. The main library was huge, maybe 3 blocks long. It looked like the Greek Parthenon. So I'm like, man, I'm getting ready to do some exploration. That's how to trick myself into doing history. So these big metal doors, so I open them up, and everybody's quiet, these marble on the floor, and these frescoes and murals and these columns. So I'm like, tap, tap, tap. I'm like, oh man. So I had to trick myself to learn. So like you say, the Dewey Decimal System, I had to find my book, and I'm smelling all that old leather, all that old paper, and I found it. And it was Septimius Severus, an African emperor of Rome. Never heard of it. So grabbed the book. I don't think I never took it back either. My library fined about $1 million, but I think I still.
What that fine look like right now?
I think I still got it home. But reading. When I do my curriculum, I tell the students, don't take my word for it. Take down notes and do your own research. That's the key. That's how I get around in CRT. So my point is, I would read and I would understand stuff, and I'd get back to school and I'd write stuff, and the teachers would be like, man, where you get that from? So I was a senior in college, just to fast forward. History class, my major, I'm like, man, I'm about to get out of here, I'm about to walk. He said, you could do your report on any Roman emperor you want to. I'm like, I know I got my boy's book somewhere in the house. Yeah. So I go get the book. I do it on Septimius Severus. He was born in where Libya is now, North Africa. And he changed the whole way the military was structured. Your Roman legions back in those days were almost like a penalty. Either the folks you captured, you put them in the army, or convicts or prisoners. They was always on the march. He said, let me do this. Let me cut y'all's years of service down. Let me pay y'all a little more money. Let me give you a piece of land when you quit. But if you stay, I'll bump you up another spot. And he started having rapid deployment places around. You know, the Roman Empire was expansive. And so he started changing things around. And Rome was, you know, it was like, okay, I want to join the military now. And when I turned the report in, man, I was on, man. Typewriter, man, carbon paper, you know, we didn't have no whiteout back then either. So he hit the roof, little bitty guy. He looked like Roddy McDowell. Why did you do it on this obscure despot? You had a bunch of other emperors you could have done it on.
This is a teacher now telling
This is the professor in front of everybody.
Wow.
And I've never really held my tongue, so I'm like, man, what are you talking about? You know, I said, Julius Caesar, he wasn't really no Caesar, he wasn't no emperor. Julius Caesar was just a hustler. We started talking and stuff. So he split, went on sabbatical. I had to petition, he gave me incomplete. I had to petition him, and I finally got it done. But my point is, I did my own research. That's what we got to tell these kids today. Do your own research. That's the problem with history. Kids ain't got books no more, but most of the folks that write the history books, they don't know. Another example, you talk about Egypt. When folks talk about Egypt, they talk about 1,000 years after the Egyptian civilization has been going on, when the Romans, the Greeks, the Persians, the Syrians had come to Egypt and intermingled with the Egyptians. And so what Herodotus said, the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, whatever the case may be, they had woolly curly hair and dark skin. But when we see Egypt, we see Yul Brynner, look like a Mexican, you know? So what they say is, by that time, the Egyptians had lost the intensity of their color. That's the term they use. So they had intermingled. Wow. You know, so that's number one. I know you want me to say that, so I'll stop and maybe ask another question, because I'll keep on talking about crazy stuff.
So one for you, Burp. No, that's good. This is good. And that's what I'm talking about when you start talking about, you know, selecting which parts of history, sanitizing some, taking some, cut. The whole thing is the whole thing. And Burp, I've had conversations about the history books. You know, as an educator of 20 years, the history books are, many of them, not all, but many of them are written by certain people from certain groups. Absolutely. And I want you to just hit on that real quick, and then we can pass it back to Dr. Blunt on his take.
Even with some of the books that are being written now, you have certain interest groups who are writing history, and that's what's being taught for us as educators to teach. We have to teach this. You guys do this curriculum. Even you have, like, some curriculums are written by, like, the daughters of the Dixiecrats, and they are pushing their versions of history, which is completely watered down, into the schools. So they say things like how African slave history was good because African slaves learned a trade, or they totally spin it, which is the furthest from the truth. And slavery they say things like slavery wasn't a bad thing, which they totally conscrew. And slavery was a horrible time, but these people who write these books who don't know, they're totally pushing history to a completely different way than it was intended to be taught. And from what it was, they are totally missing the point. But that's why it's important for us to talk to our elders who do know and get the real history, so we can make sure that our history never dies. But it's all over these schools, and they get paid to push these curriculums in the school. So that's a whole nother conversation about pushing this curriculum so that these kids, they forget our history. And, you know, if we forget our history, then ultimately we forget where we're going.
No, that's great. Dr. Blunt, I want you to add to that. And one thing I want to ask you to what Burp just said is, you know, when you look at pastors, right? Pastors use an activity or a methodology called exegesis and eisegesis to break down biblical text to make sure that you fully understand it, right? How should a historian, somebody who honors history and studies history, how should a historian properly break down text and be like, yo, this is valid, this is consistent, as you mentioned earlier, this is chronological, and this is in the ebbs and flow of the tapestry of history? How would you encourage somebody to do that in a proper manner?
Man, that is a good segue, because as I mentioned, the elements of history is accuracy, using all the information you have around you, telling the truth, but perception and interpretation is inculcated in history. Like you said about the pastors, they I don't want to say twist, that's a bad term, but they present matters and to prove the point they've already come up with, almost like a school teacher. Christopher Columbus discovered America. I don't care what you say, but the pastors, the preachers do that, and I'm not saying anything with disrespect, but they do that to reinforce what they're trying to say. But when you're talking about perception and interpretation, what is perception? How I see it. January 6th, a prime example. This group saw it as everybody was just chilling. This group saw it as a bunch of lunatics having, some crazy stuff. This group saw that brother get lynched as that's what he got. This group saw the brother getting lynched as something that was totally, abhorrent. What are you doing? So perception, then interpretation. Like you were saying, based on who you are, you interpret things differently. So when you write that book, you mention the Dixiecrats, the United Daughters of the Confederacy. After they lost the Civil War, this is the only group I know that, go back to what you said originally, that the victors write the history and the vanquished read it. This is the only time where the vanquished wrote the history. And what is the most important weapon when you're giving kids? A textbook. Now it may be a cell phone or a Chromebook, but that's an important weapon. What they did is they took the Civil War and said it was a war between the states. The North invaded the South. The fight was heroic. It was a lost cause. And you're like, wow. And as Bert said, this lady named Rutherford, she was one of the foremost behind the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and she was like, slaves didn't want to be free. They was like, what are we going to do now? We don't want to leave the plantation. So that's the story she told, and they used kids forcing that down their throat. And I did not realize, while the 50s, the Dixiecrats were so violent, because they had been fed that since they were kids, And then you come with the whole race thing. Race is a word, a category that was made up during the Revolutionary War. Herodotus tells you that he didn't categorize people by color of their skin. He categorized them by their language and their cultures. And like the Senegalese scholar, Dr. Diop says, he said, if you want to oppress a people, you take their history, their language, and their principles, and you superimpose your language, history, and principles on top of them. And that's exactly what they're doing now. When I go back, I was never an African history guy. My father would go to Africa every year. You want to go to Africa? Man, I don't want to go to Africa, bro. It's too, like Shaft in Africa, be too hot over there for me. I told them about that the other day. They said, man, it's hot. I said, I feel like Shaft in Africa. We don't understand. I think, never mind. But anyway, I did go to Morocco, but my dad would go to West Africa, East Africa, and they had me believing there wasn't nothing going on in Africa but dust. But when you start reading your African history, the Egyptians, and again, let me take a caveat. When I say white people, I ain't talking about all white people. I don't know all white people. Just talking about the ones I know, I talk to, I listen to. When I talk about black folks, I ain't talking about all black folks. But white folks, historians and scholars try to take Egypt and act like it's not part of Africa. Yeah. Like Michigan ain't part of the U.S. Yeah. And as I mentioned, 1,000 years, they finally lost the intensity of their color. So we know they were black. And back to Cush, I never finished that thought process. Back to Cush, it's in the Bible. Cush in Genesis, the Garden of Eden, they talk about Cush. They try to say, well, no, it was in Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. That ain't what it says. History is about connecting the dots, really. You got to connect your dots. And my dots and those kids' dots is just as good as anybody else's dots. Yeah. So again, to wrap that part up, the way the history books are written, they're deliberately written, I shouldn't say that. In my opinion, they're deliberately written to misrepresent what the true history is. Africans wrote the first, before hieroglyphics, it was something called manu netter. It was a type of writing. They had the first clock, had the first physicians, the first brain surgeons, on and on and on. Yeah, but when you sanitize that, and whitewash is a good term, when you whitewash it, you try to make yourself feel like, okay, we can't compete on an equal playing field, so we're gonna come up with race. Your color is dark, so that's a problem. Well, okay, white people, that was a term used back in England before the colonialism to designate elite women who were so white to show that they didn't go out in the sun, they didn't do no work. They always in a carriage, they had an umbrella. That's why you see these old movies where folks, French and English, putting a white powder on their face. The whiter you were, or the whiter you portrayed yourself, that's the higher up you were in social status. Because if you were brown skinned, you were out working. Now, calling a white man white was bad. I mean, he was
denigrating term.
Yeah, you white man. Why? Because you're lazy, because you're in the house all day, you're not doing nothing, you're sickly. And they didn't, just like the word woke, they didn't flip that. They didn't flip that to make it seem something bad. What did they do? They called the Native Americans savages. They called the Africans subhuman. Yet look at all the pain and stuff you didn't inflict it on people. Y'all the ones doing all the savage and all the abhorrent stuff. And again, man, you talk about history going into science. Guys coming up with all these bogus scientific analogies about, well, the medulla.
The cranium, the shape of
yeah.
the head.
It's bad. But then they found out, well, some aliens came from outer space and they had big heads, so that was good, but that don't count for those black folks. So, again, white folks, not all, they done pulled every trick in the book and they pulled them again and made up some new tricks. The same thing as doing now. They banning books. They trying to make sure these young kids are getting force-fed this sanitized history. This ain't nothing new. It's nothing new at all. Back to the 90 Daughters of the Confederacy, they had the same thing. If these books do not show the South in the proper way, they can't be in the schools anymore. I have my hands on a 1950 Georgia book, and just what Burf said, it said that the blacks were happy, slavery was good, they fed them, they clothed them, they treated them like family, it sang songs, and they didn't want to be free. That's what the book said. I'm paraphrasing, but it said slaves did not want to be free. I'm like, man, and they didn't hustle us that for years and years and years, starting with the real history. You look at real historians, again, Herodotus, he was called the father of history. You say, man, the Egyptians were dark skinned with woolly hair. But folks said, no, I don't want to believe him. But Herodotus was in Africa. Another point I want to make, we talk about all the African civilizations. Just to pick out a couple, Kush, Songhai, Carthage. I asked the students, you guys heard of Carthage? No. Heard of Rome? Yeah. Carthage hammered Rome, and handled and mollywhopped Rome in the Second Punic War. Really? Hannibal came across the Alps with an army and elephants. Man, a tactical thing that was never heard of before, and he mollywhopped Rome. Oh, we didn't know that. They were a major seaport. The Phoenicians were really Carthaginians, traveling all over the world. Traders, Africans were masters of trade and merchants. White folks were not. They were the takers of trade and merchant. Songhai, Timbuktu, I don't know if you guys heard of Timbuktu. When I was a kid, that was like a bad word. Man, I'm gonna send you to Timbuktu, you'd quit acting up. Oh man, I don't wanna go there. That was the oldest university in the world. Yeah. When 99% of the Europeans were illiterate, including their kings, the Moors, whose empire stretched from Spain and Portugal all the way to eastern Iran, they had 17 universities. So the Moors is something that folks want to, but man, they weren't black. The Moorish guy that developed algebra, they said he was Persian because he was in what is now present-day Iran, but he was a Moor. Those are things, folks just twist up.
Dr. Blunt, that's a very powerful point that you make. Burf, I want you to add to that, and I have a question for you before we send it back to Doc.
So, in regards to like, once again, just going back to all the stuff that's not being put into in history books, even what else is also kind of bothersome is the way they separate history. So we only talk about Black history in February. That's the only time we talk about it. And actually, some people even only start Black history with slavery. They start Black knowing that there was so much stuff that happened prior to. Some people only talk about Black history in the Civil Rights Movement. Once again, forgetting of the Civil Rights War, forgetting everything that happened prior to Mansa Musa and everything that came prior to. So just how history itself is just so, you talk about sanitized and whitewashed, and if we aren't careful, our kids will believe that stuff and continue to walk with it and hold it as like gospel. It's the furthest from it.
Yeah, I want to, because this term has come up a few times today, sanitizing, whitewashing Hitler, right? This man came into another country that was not his own, duped the whole country into thinking that this is the superior race, blonde hair, blue eye, which he was not, by the way, right? And tricked the whole country. And one thing I always think about, Doc, is what do people from Germany, like to this day, like how do they feel? And I was talking to my wife, and my wife was telling me that in Germany, one of the things that they make them do, all of the students, is that they make them go through a history class. They make them go to the museums. They make them learn about what happened so that it may never happen again. History is history. No matter what happened, good, bad, or indifferent, and you have to tell it, you got to tell all of it. And I think that we can learn from that model. You know what I'm saying? Of, hey, this is what happened. This is what really happened. This is why we are embarrassed. This is why we are hurting. And we will never do this again, because we are going to take the proper steps and not run away from it. We're going to attack it so that it may never happen again. What are your thoughts about some of the egregious things? And I know I'm going a little bit off the rails right now, but how do you attack these things and embrace them so that we say, no, this happened. This is a part of our history, but let's not ever let this happen again.
Well, you had a good point. Folks out there now, some of these politicians are just trying to display history when it celebrates themselves. You mentioned the Germans. In 1904, there was a German Holocaust that they put on the Herero people. This is after the Berlin Conference, where the white folks in Europe said there's a problem in Africa. They got all the resources, we don't. Let's go to Africa and colonize them. Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, German, East German Africa, all these things, the Belgian Congo. Then 1904, they had some genocide in Africa from the German colonies. They said, we want everything you got. So Joseph Mengele, who was the angel of death in the Holocaust for the Jews in World War II, he trained under this guy who did everything to the Africans that they did to the Jews. He tested, that was a test balloon in 1904. So you get a chance to look up 1904, the African Holocaust, the Herero tribe. He just tried to wipe them all out.
So that was prior to King Leopold.
That was a little after. That's right after King Leopold gave everybody the high sign to go to Germany and cut it up. So this guy went and said, we're not going to cut it up. We're just going to cut them out. But the point is, the Holocaust of the Jews, which they never forget, we ain't even heard about the African Holocaust. They ain't even heard about it. Man, we're not going to talk about that. Number two, you talk about first Africans coming into the so-called New World. I asked my students, how many folks think the first Africans came to the New World with slaves? 90% of them raised their hands. But they don't realize that there was a term called indentured servitude. Blacks and whites came indentured servitude. Right. Antonio the Negro is the main one. Antonio the Negro, he came as an indentured servitude. He worked his way out of indentured servitude, got married, had his kids, had 250 acres of land in Virginia, and he had his own indentured servants. James Fortin, there's a ton of that. Because once it was a level playing field, our folks was on it because we was merchants, you know.
Can you explain indentured servitude?
Well, you want to get to the New World. Say, dog, I'm trying to get to the New World, but I'm a little light on cash. He said, I tell you what, I'll pay your way. I'll pay your way, but once you get to the New World, everything you earn comes to me. Now, these weren't just rank and file folks. They were craftsmen. They were skilled. So let me just put a pin in that for a minute. Because I think of this guy in Florida talking about taught enslaved people a trade. They brought that trade with them. Farming, agriculture, metalwork, leatherwork. You know, they brought that with them. That's why they was like, dog, this is cool. So anyway, so back to indentured servitude. So after you work it out for 7 years, you pay your debt and you get your own. What happened is the landowner was like, all these black folks got land, they got indentured servants, we scared now. So let's change the rules like they doing now. Ain't nothing changed. They, you know what they doing. Let's change the rules. So it went from indentured servitude. If you were white, they called you a redemptorist because you're redeeming. You know, no servitude. We don't want to say that about white people at all. So you're a redemptorist or you're an apprentice. You know, so they start changing the categories like they're doing now, changing the nomenclature. Okay, then they was like, well, gee, we got these Africans here. We just ain't gonna let them out their contract. Y'all stuck. We supposed to 7 years, too bad. What y'all gonna do about it? So that's how they hardly started flipping it to like, man, indentured servitude is not good. Oh, another thing they call the white indentured servants, they changed the name to free willers. You're here on your own free will. So psychologically, they're separating that from indentured servants. Then they went from indentured servitude to slavery based on the color of their skin, their race. That's how that flip happened. But most of the Africans that came here, I shouldn't say most, a lot of Africans that came here to the New World weren't enslaved. They just got hustled into get enslaved. And the story that they tell, well, difference between white people and black people is black people came here in slavery, white people came here in freedom. That's not true. That's not true. These folks came from England, from Britain, all these areas, and they were convicts. They were trying to get rid of them. They were convicts. They owed debt. That was part of their sentence. You go to the New World, you know, and, you know, we don't want you here in England no more. So I got a PowerPoint that I do that says white male slaves for sale. You know, and folks are like, wow, we didn't know that. Oh, you didn't know that. Wow, nobody told you that. Wonder why.
Part of history. You
wonder why. So yes, not only we know that African history has been desecrated. Usually when the archaeologists find something, what do? They tell everybody and they save it. When they found all these pyramids in Sudan, he destroyed everything and took all the valuables and tried to sell them. His name was Ferlini, Giuseppe Ferlini. And then when the French went into Egypt, my father told me this, I don't know if it's true or not. He said, you notice all the noses are broken off the statues. That's because they didn't want to make it look like a black guy, if you had the nose.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
So I was at the Luxor. A couple of years ago, and they got the copy of the Sphinx. I'm like, damn, he looked like Tom Cruise and shit. So I'm like, man, oh man, oh man. They'll tell you nothing about the Kushite pharaohs in the 25th dynasty. They ran Egypt for over 1,000 years. They reunited Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. So you see these guys, you see the old Egyptians having these white crowns. Then when you got to the Kushite pharaohs, they united Egypt, and you see them with 2 serpents on their crown. Let them know that we in charge. We got them both. So these are things, man, that if you don't do your research, and I tell these kids, don't take my word for it, write it down. Triangulate, look up at least 3 different sources. Look up 3 different sources.
That's what I was going to ask you next. That's a perfect segue because, you know, when you start looking at, you know, youth, kids, and I want you to get in on this too, social media right now, right? Social media, I think is a double-edged sword because it is not only is it illuminating so much of this thing that we're talking about today, right? This hidden history, the sanitization of history. It's people are coming to the forefront with knowledge that we never knew before. But at the same time, it's a place of misinformation, right? So how do you balance the two? You know what I'm saying, for a student, and how do you balance it in this context of history?
Well, one of the things, in my schooling, you always got to check your sources. So just because he said it is fine. We could even go biblically, study to show yourself approved. So even if we're talking about, just because you say it, it doesn't make it gospel. And I know I got in trouble from when I was a child with my mom. Just because you say it don't mean it's right, Mom. Another story. But it's the same thing with education. Just because you say it, and I'm notorious for this too, I will be up looking at something on TikTok, and I'm like, hold on, I'll call Dr. Blunt. I'll also look it up, and if I don't find it from wherever I go to find it, it has to be a valid, so I know it's true, because whoever told me, that's just their perception of what they think happened. So let me get some context, some pretext and context and post-text to kind of understand, what exactly it is that's being said here. But I think most kids don't want to do that work. So if I see something on the internet, that's that. And to be honest, that's where even the media goes too. Just because they heard it from one time, it's about being first. It's not about being accurate. So a lot of these people, they go out there, they use social media to learn from it, but they don't go on the research to find out what happened before that. And even, and you know this in the media as well, they will show you just a clip of what they want you to hear. When there's so much more that happened prior to, there's so much that happened after, but they just show you what they want you to see so they can control exactly what you're thinking, and it controls
Emotion.
the emotion. Absolutely. So just because it's on social media, it doesn't mean it's gospel. Yeah. Dr. Blunt.
You are correct, man. And you take me back to the point I started, I never finished, about the Garden of Eden. I did my research. It was in Africa. They say it's in Iran. So I'm like, Iraq. I'm like, so it's a known fact through DNA that the first fossils of a human was found in Africa and Ethiopia. They call it Lucy. It was the first fossil. Then the oldest known mathematical instrument, a ruler of some sort, was found. It's called a Lubumbo bone. It was current Swaziland, South Africa now. So there's no question now, folks say, yeah, mankind began in Africa. So, you're not being a biblical scholar, I'm like, well, if the Garden of Eden is in Africa, and Africa was where the mother of mankind, the original name of Africa was Al-Bakan or something, I can't remember. It meant mother of mankind and Garden of Eden. It meant that. That's okay. The Bible verifies that. DNA science verifies that. So how come every time I see Adam and Eve, they white people with blonde hair? They naked in Garden of Eden. And I'm like, they're supposed to be Africans. But that's all I've seen. Boom, 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 boom. And folks is like, hey, that's Adam and Eve, Adam's white, Eve's white. Write it down, put it on the test, let's move on. But students nowadays can challenge that. Teachers allow them to challenge them if they have their facts. I didn't have that. I didn't have that opportunity. We just shoved it down our throats.
With that, there's certain things that the teachers aren't allowed to talk about now to verify what's right and what's not right. So even if you were to speak on their thoughts about it, even if they were to speak on or speak out about what it is, the teacher would kind of hide behind, well, we can't talk about that. They'll run behind that when it's not the truth. But they're controlling. It's a very controlling environment, is what I see. They're controlling how you think and what you think about. And like you said, they're definitely controlling the emotions of how we feel about that particular thing. And even talking about like Columbus discovered America, where he wrote in his journal that there were people with black faces there 1,800 years prior to.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know how that started with Mansa Musa? See, there's three currents from West Africa, went to North America, went to Central America, went to South America. And Mansa Musa, who was the richest man in the world still to this day, his bag would be bigger than Jeff Bezos's right now. Today's money. He would go on the Hajj, on the pilgrimage. He'd have so much gold that he would destroy the monetary of the state. He'd have to leave them a bunch of gold. So anyway, his king left with 2,000 ships to get on that current that took them to South America. And that's what Birthright was talking about. They found Africans in Central America. Look at the Olmec heads, you know. So you figure, hey, 2,000 ships, nobody came back. Some of them probably made it on that particular current. But again, the teachers let me come to their classes because mine is the color of history. It's not black history. So folks, you know, I talk about Latinos and that, and you talk about the second elected president of Mexico. How you going to talk about him? You talk about black history. Well, his father was black. You know, you're like, really? You talk about Queen Charlotte, with the name city of Charlotte after. She was from a line of black people. That goes back to the one drop rule. You know what the one drop rule is, right? Yeah. Okay, well, back in when I talked about bringing folks over to indentured servitude and working their way out and getting their bags, these black folks had so much dough, they changed the rules. First, they changed the categories. You know, okay, we're going to change the category. You can't be an indentured servant. You can't be a redemptorist. You can't be an apprentice. That's for white folks. You got to be an indentured servant. And then we're just not going to honor our contract and make you a slave and take all your stuff from you. You're like, whoa. So before there was a group that was doing very well. And they said, well, you know, they kind of like white people. They black, but, you know, they've kind of mingled a little bit. So they said, okay, if you have an eighth or less of black blood in you, we'll consider you being white. You can be one of us. And everybody's like, cool, we good, we rolling. Then they got so big, they said, well, we didn't change that rule. If you got any drop of black blood in you, no matter how far back it goes, you're considered black. And what does that mean? That means you can't be a citizen, you can't have a firearm, you can't go to work. We taking all your stuff from you. And you say, wow. And the one drop rule is only inherent to America. Nowhere else in the country do they judge you by that one drop rule. So like I said, the Queen of England had some black ancestors out of Portugal because of the Moors. She would be considered black in the US, the Queen of England. The second elected president of Mexico, Vicente Guerrero, who abolished slavery in Spain and Mexico, he would be considered black. So we are the only country that trips on that bogus stuff. They doing everything they can, every trick in the book, and making up new tricks. But their weapon now is their cell phone. I'm gonna say this, which is kind of off track, but on the track. My conspiracy theory boy called me. Matter of fact, a lot of stuff he calls me now. I kind of believe him now. And he told me a couple of years ago that when they separate those Mexican kids at the border, half of them are gonna be found because they was harvesting their organs throughout the world. I said, man, I don't believe that. But now I'm like, bruh, that might be true. But you know, he said, man, it's you know, it's crazy out there, man. He called me about some real crazy stuff. But anyway, I'm gonna get off the track. You go ahead.
Oh no, this is really interesting information, and I wish we had all day because I know you have so much knowledge. And I
know, and I'm bouncing all over the place, man.
I got one for you, and this is a loaded question. And so whatever is like, you know, top of the mind, tip of the tongue, please share it. But what would you say are the three biggest occurrences in history that you've studied that you say, wow, no one's talking about this?
Well, I told you about the African Holocaust in 1904.
Yep.
I had no idea. That just dropped in my lap. I stumbled across that. That's number one, that you look back historically, chronologically, and folks have done everything they could to suppress African and black history. And when you think about that, you know, you got archaeologists destroying stuff. That's antithetical to what they're supposed to do. You got Christians talking about hanging people. They're taking their kids to lynchings down in the South. Let's watch this black guy get burned. What kind of mentality is that? You know, what kind of mentality is that let's go to a lynching? You know, so, and they try to tell folks that black folks are the ones that are vicious. The black male is a problem. You know, politicians is a problem. So I would say number one, just the revelation on the amount of oppression and synthesizing that's gone into eliminating African and black history. I mean, we had the first clock, paper, papyrus, all of that. So that's number one. Once that thing comes at you. Then I talk about the Holocaust. And I would say number three is that the inventions that black folks have done I was talking to a school, it was a Mormon school as a matter of fact, and I talked about Lewis Latimer developing the filament that goes into the light bulb that Thomas Edison got. He's like, no, I don't believe that. Again, I'm gonna wrap up by saying this, man, it goes back to perception and interpretation. If some folks say, I'm not gonna believe that, I ain't gonna believe, life started in Africa. Well, if it's the one cognitive dissonance, but if it's the one drop rule, then all y'all about to be black. So I'm coming to get all your stuff. So you ain't gonna tell me. So that's the trip. And I'm working on a paper now called Cognitive Dissonance. It's where your mind would not allow you to accept the truth. Yeah. You come up with these alternative facts. And I don't watch I'm not tethered to social media, but I do try to keep up aboard. And the things these folks say on TV are just so crazy. I'm like, do they believe that? Or is that they hustle? And they talk about black men have a genetic code based on slavery because they were used as studs, and that's why they're trying to make as many kids as they can. They don't want to be married to their women because that's the way they was breeded. So that's the way black men are. And black women, they hard on their black men because they ain't never used to having a man around the house based from slavery days. Well, if we got that genetic code, how come white folks don't have the slave master genetic code in their head that every time they show up somewhere, they think they got to be in charge? So it can't be slavery has affected the black male genetically and not affected the white male genetically. So where does that connect at? And again, just to wrap this up, man, as I'm finding more about Africa and the things, the oldest astronomical observatory was found in Africa, Nabat Playa, 7,000 years before Stonehenge. So again, that's number one, just the fact that the amount of information that's out there, we just got to tell our kids, go look for it. And the internet, my conspiracy theory boy I was talking about, he said, man, Blunt, they fired a professor at UCLA because he wouldn't give blacks easier tests. I'm like, damn, man, send me that. So that's what the article said. I'm like, wow, let me look up another article, little bit different. It said, yeah, this one student in class is talking about George Floyd, and he should be a little bit more sympathetic to the blacks and give them more time to study. And the teacher said, man, I'm sorry, but I'm not doing it. The third teacher, he responded with a series of racial epithets. Them ends and this and that and blah, 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 blah. They all flunk in my class anyway. That's why he got fired. So if I'd have taken this one article from my conspiracy theory boy and ran with it without doing my research. So my color of history curriculum is just that. That's how I get around the CRT. The teacher said, go YouTube and look at Mr. Blunt's color of history because it doesn't say black history. I talk about Latinos, I talk about Japanese, I talk about various folks. A lot of folks here in Arizona don't realize one of the guys that raised the flag in Iwo Jima, Marine, was from Sacaton, Arizona, Ira Hayes. He's a Native American, a Pima Indian. They don't know about the Navajo code talkers, a lot of them right here in Arizona. So they're like, oh, so that's why, okay, Mr. Blunt, you're not just talking about all black people, are you? And I'm like, no. So that's it. The three questions, the history, the way it's been suppressed, how you got to read 3 or 4 different things before you make a decision. And white folks have made a big mistake by grabbing us out of Africa. And they didn't grab anybody. They grabbed the biggest, the strongest, the smartest, the youngest of this. And we survived the Middle Passage. Then they got us, they took our names from us, sodomized the men, tried to take everything from manhood away from them, wouldn't let them have their kids' own ownership, take away their names, take away their language, gave them a number, sold them, took their women, breeded them. And I'm here today because somebody in my line survived.
That's right.
Somebody survived. So they've made a super race of black people. They keep trying to trick us, And again, man, I can go on and on about music, man. We the only race that denigrates ourselves, Anyway, man, I'm just glad you guys let me vent this.
Yeah, no, this is...
And I didn't use no curse words either, so if my sister sees this, she'll be, I'm good.
All right. All right, man. These are some great points, and one of the things, Dr. Blunt, if you don't mind, can you just share with us real quick some of the inventions? And Bert, you and I have talked about this before. Some of the inventions that Black men and women have contributed to society that we don't even know about. We don't even think about.
Okay, perfect segue. I have this in my in my color history, man. I said I woke up in the morning, turned on the light, Lewis Latimer. I went to the kitchen. The guy that upgraded the stove was a brother, can't remember his name exactly. The ironing board. I said I squeezed the lemon. The guy that made the lemon squeezer was an African-American guy. But just the ones I know was Garrett Morgan. If you're at the street corner and you see the street light, Garrett A. Morgan is a brother, did that, the three lights.
He also did the gas mask.
Also did the gas mask,
Oh, wow.
you did correct. You have not Benjamin Banneker, but you have Jan McZeiliger. He developed a machine to put the soles on your shoes so folks could quit walking around in those particular moccasins. Norbert Rillieux, Rilleaux, he developed a system to refine sugar. Those are the ones I can think of at the top of my head. But going back to what Birthright said earlier, is when they talked about history in school, they talked about George Washington Carver, the Peanut Man. Never told me he developed alternative fuel. Never told me he's the one that developed peanut butter. I thought he was just a dude fooling around with some peanuts and stuff. He was an exception to the rule.
It's so much more with that too. What he also did was he helped bring the soil back from it being taken out from the cotton.
Sure did.
He did a lot more, and that, like they limit, and even Edison, Thomas Edison, he said that he is not an inventor. He said he was a businessman.
Oh yeah, he made everybody sign over their stuff.
Yes, because at the time black people didn't have patents. They weren't allowed to have patents.
Wow.
So,
I'll tell you something funny. You saw that thing on YouTube a couple of last month where this guy was beating his folks with the folding chair, right at the.
oh yeah, the Alabama.
Yeah.
There was a black man that invented the folding chair. This guy had a T-shirt with somebody's hands and the folding chair on it. Black inventors putting it to work. So we need to just tell our kids to read. They got that tool in there. I'd have been a Rhodes Scholar if I'd have had a phone.
But once again, the resource, like you said earlier, it could be a gift or a curse, and a lot of these kids use it for the wrong thing, just to stay in communication with each other. When it is, I know when I can't sleep in the morning, I go down a rabbit hole. So even if I see something on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and then I just go to see, is it true? And then go to triangulate, like you said, to see where it is. And then I go and, hey, did this happen? And then you give me details about it.
Yeah.
And then I go in the book, check it out in the book to see if it really happened.
See if it is
or
legitimate.
like how accurate is it?
Yeah.
So if I give it back to you, I want to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah.
I tell these kids, I said, you guys got your phones? No. Why? Pull them out. We can pull our phones out? Yeah, but I want you to Google this for me. And I tell them how to Google. Just so you spend your time underneath the desk playing a game. If you spend half your time doing your lessons, how come you can't go home and get the answers, memorize them, and come to school the next day and write them down? We can do that? Yeah, you can do that. That's like reading a book.
Yeah.
But they don't equate that. So they think the phone is antithetical to school. You can't learn. No, you got to use it correctly.
It's a tool. It's a resource.
And on a side note, it's just teachers don't know how to teach with it. So therefore, they're not doing a good job of. They're trying to. They got different programs like Kahoot, stuff like that, where you can put your phones out, but they don't know how to teach to it. They kind of feel like because the kids won't stay focused long enough. Even though they're Googling something, they'll get a text. Hey, Dr. Blunt, did you see the game last night? That's what they think.
Yeah.
So.
You mentioned something powerful last time, though, in a prior podcast. I mean, we're sitting here with a lot of knowledge here and wisdom. You said that school is just one form of education. Kids are getting educated outside of the textbooks, outside of the classroom. Especially in today's day and age. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, Dr. Blunt, is I wanted to ask you about the removal and the cancellation. We're talking about history, right? Not sanitizing it, not whitewashing it. But I want you to just speak real quick on the removal of different landmarks, the cancellation of certain people, whether they're comedians, politicians, public figures. I remember when we were kids, man, some of the stuff we watched, you couldn't watch it today. You can't watch it today. I mean, like little, just simple TV shows. They would get canceled in living color, like some of the skits, you know what I'm saying?
Homie the Clown.
Homie the Clown, like,
Major Pain.
Major Pain. You sent me a clip the other day. I'm like, yo, that couldn't fly today.
No.
I mean, Dukes of Hazzard. Like we didn't think about the Confederate flag on top of. We was just looking at Boss Hogg. I did. I mean, I'm 8 years old, and I'm like, man, look at Roscoe Pico. You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't think about. You know what I mean? So I just want you to talk about that. Should we be removing and canceling different landmarks, people, places? We had it was called Squaw Peak here.
Yeah.
That was changed
I remember
because of the name. You have Redskins, you have Blackhawks, Seminoles, Indians, right? Like people who are fighting to keep them, people who are fighting against them. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, but you should mention that. I had a friend who's a Native American guy, and I came to class. They wanted somebody to come talking about the N-word. He said, man, these white folks want to know why they can't use the N-word. They said they made it up, and now we can't let them use it. And so I tell them, because they don't know how to use it. In my time, we use it in all different type of formats. If you want to disrespect somebody, say, man, here come this N. Oh, man, don't trust that N. Oh, my N, So we use it in all different variations. And the white folks, they don't have that inflection. They just use it. Well, I'm trying to say you my friend. No. Then my Native American friend said, Redskins, when the colonists were paying folks to take scalps, when they caught a Native American, the colonists would strip all his. We're not going to take his scalp. We're going to strip all of his skin off of him. And so they was just red. So a redskin was a derogatory term. Now he told me that. I have not vetted that. I just figured it sounded correct. He said redskin is a negative term. It's a dead Native American who they've taken his skin off to teach him a lesson, like hanging a black guy and letting him sing there to show to everybody else this is what's going to happen to you. But I really didn't have a problem with Blackhawks or Seminoles. It seemed to me as more of a respectful thing. Maybe I had it wrong, but how come the Minnesota Vikings got a white guy with a blonde mustache? What'd you give to that stuff? The Minnesota Vikings. You got to blow the horn before every game. I'm like, I don't know if I really like that, so I'm glad they got beat the other day. But I don't really have a problem if it's supposed to be in a respectful manner. The Blackhawks, the Florida State Seminoles, because if they really do their history, they'll find out the Seminole Scouts, they fought with the Buffalo Soldiers, and when black folks ran away, they worked, even though Seminoles did hold slaves at some point too. Absolutely. My last point too, I know I'm off the track, but we talk about slavery. If I give a lecture, always somebody say, well, tell us about presentism, Dr. Blunt. What are you talking about? Well, look it up. No, you brought it up. You tell me what it is. When you punish people with today's laws for things that happened years ago, I said like slavery. Yeah, well, everybody had slavery. They sure did. When you had slavery, it was you defeat somebody, you take them in, you put them in the army, put them to work, you take their women, you prostitute them out, or you put them in your harem. I said when Europeans came, they tried to turn it into a breeding scenario. We're going to breed folks. We're going to take men, women, put them together and breed. The Europeans tried to turn it into an industry. It wasn't just slavery, like I captured you, I'm gonna put you in slavery. And they didn't dehumanize them all the time like they do now. So I just wanted to say that when folks talk about everybody had slavery, Africans had slavery, the world, in slavery they had white slaves, but when it came to Europeans and the colonies, they tried to take slavery and turn it into an industry, develop a whole new caste or a race of people, just trying to breed them, which I think is sick. And they keep trying to tell us that we the ones that are subhuman. They're the ones that are sick. And again, I ain't saying all white people, I don't know them all, but that's my thoughts on these ethnic logos and ethnic trademarks. Blackhawks have a problem with the Seminoles. What else we got out there? You mentioned something else.
The Indians who've now
I may have a problem with that. Problem with that.
Yeah, there's a handful of teams called the Indians.
Yeah.
But the main one that we know is Major League Baseball have now been changed.
Yeah, just that logo, Chief Wahoo.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, yeah, it's like the Birmingham Coons. You know, I'm like, I'd have a problem with that too.
Yeah.
But if it's trying to put in a respectful manner, and again, somebody tells me, hey man, I don't like that, I'm with them. I'm not going to stand my ground on that. But I just think that is all part of this whole mass manipulation. We don't control the media. We don't control the media. And when I look back on African history, folks just kind of took our stuff, they put their stuff on top of it, and put it out there. And you know, the music. Don't say I'm black and I'm proud no more. Young, gifted, and black. You know, it's a bunch of denigrating stuff. And I don't hear any other group. I mean, I haven't heard it all though, but I haven't heard any other group that gets on the media like that and talk about themselves that way. I'm a thug and I know some real pimps, and these guys ain't no pimps. I grew up with some pimps. You know, Pimpin' Nudie had a '68 Eldorado that was suede. He didn't have it paint, it was a suede Eldorado. These kids now talking about pimping, man, they would eat you up and they'd have you out there like Sissy Brown. Oh, I forgot.
No, that's good. That's good.
Sissy Brown had both boys and girls back when we was in school. He's like, what are you pimping boys for? We didn't cross our mind.
Yeah.
But these guys nowadays, that's our kids, the youth, that's how we getting beat. You know, the textbook is a major weapon. Now it's the Chromebook. Now it's the cell phone. Just indoctrinating our people. You got to have street cred. You got to go to jail for folks to respect you.
And
wow.
And also what it does, what they're doing is to make us seem like our value is only in sports. We can't do nothing else but sports. We can't. That's our entertainment.
Or entertain, yeah.
Like we don't have no more Benjamin Bannekers. We don't have any more Marcus Garveys. Just the real educated people who could.
Right, those are the one-off. He's an exception. Barack Obama, he's an exception. He ain't like the rest. He may be your color, but not y'all's kind. Yeah. I get it. I get it.
You said something earlier, Doc, I wanted to hit on as we get ready to wrap up and close. You know, you said that, and I'm just paraphrasing, but you said, hey, we have this history here, and then they put everybody else's stuff on it. And I just want you to really parse that a little bit, because you have like the Chinese railway, you know, the things that happened there. You had the things that happened, the egregious things that happened to the Native Americans, you know, with the diseases and
Trail of Tears.
You know what I'm saying?
Smallpox blankets.
Smallpox, you know what I'm saying? Obviously, you had slavery, you had these perpetuated and intentional things that you've already alluded to today. I just want you to talk about the conflation, right, of plights. Why we shouldn't put everybody's stuff together, and is that part of the problem, or do we need to specifically address everybody's stuff as it relates to history?
Good point. Well, you look at the common denominator, the Chinese Exclusion Act, 1870, I think. We're not bringing no more Chinese in to the U.S. after we helped to build a railroad, you know. And you talk about the Japanese internment. Mm-hmm. And when black folks are out there, you know, marching and fighting, you don't see them, you know, like, dog, they dogged y'all too. Come on, be with us. Now, when I was growing up, we were all together. You know, Yuri Wada in San Francisco at the Japanese American League, you know, the NAACP. We had Curtis Silwa with the, oh man, I forgot the name of his group. The Guardian Angels, the Latino group, the Black Panthers. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were all together at one point. Cesar Chavez with the grape strike. And then they just start picking us up, telling the Asians, y'all ain't like them, because y'all don't stand up, y'all ain't in front of everybody hollering, asking for stuff all the time. You know, like, freedom ain't y'all's to give. It ain't like, you know, affirmative action, man. I'm tired of giving these black folks scholarships to school, keeping some good white folk out. Man, that ain't education, ain't yours to parse out. So they started picking folks off, you know, and I think, I don't want to say we're doomed, but we don't understand what it's going to take to win. It's going to take us all together. White folks are the minority on this planet, I believe, now, and they're trying to hustle us and make us think like they're the majority. Yeah. I'm going to say this and I'm going to be through, man. During the pandemic, I was at the airport, mask on, everything, and there was a white guy sitting over there with a Make America, a MAGA hat on. And I was like, let me just go talk to him and just see if I can start something. I say, man, I'm sorry if I'm imposing, but Make America Great for who? Who we talking about? He said, Americans. I'm like, oh, good, man, I'm in then, right? He was like, well, I guess so. So we started talking. He was an Iraqi vet named Gordon. God bless him. I thanked him for his. We started talking. At some point, white folks going to always say, I'm not racist. I don't even, we might have been talking about the 49ers. But I'm not racist. I'm like, damn. I'm like, well, bro, let me tell you something. I said, if you wake up every morning thinking you get a bigger piece of the pie just because you're white, you status quo, that's being racist. You know, so what do you mean? I said, man, if you just wake up in the morning and you say, well, hey, you know, I'm not going to do nothing overt to oppress Dr. Blunt here. You don't have to be overt to me to be racist. I said, my dad taught me I had to be 5 times as good as white people. Why would he say that? Why would he, you know, diminish you like that? I'm like, no, he didn't diminish me, because back in the South where he grew up, you give a black guy a job, you're taking that job away from a good white man. So you had to justify that by saying, oh, you know, he's 5 times better than Zed over here. That's why I did it. You know, and I ain't paying him as much as I would pay Zed. So my father said you had to be 5 times better than white guys. So I just met you, Gordon, and I think I'm 5 times better than you. Now that's a racist statement. How does that make you feel? He said, oh, I see your point. Let me go buy you a drink. I said, I don't drink, but I'll go sit with you. He said, I never thought of it that way. So that's all part of being racist or being bigoted or just having in your mind, I'm white and I'm waking up and I deserve a lot more. And that's just, you know, that's just bad. That's the way we've been inculcated. And so long as they keep putting us together, I mean, bumping heads, came down to the golden escalator, said Mexicans was this, then African shitholes, then the Jews, then the women, you know, then the Asian flu. During the pandemic, all the middle class folks couldn't get that PPE money because it was going to the folks up top. So that line's getting really small. What's going to happen when they come for you? Everybody making under 100 grand. Everybody making under 250 grand. How you going to feel when they come for you? Mm-hmm. And these folks don't understand that. We talked a little bit earlier about how folks could just fall into that. They've always been suckers. They've always been dupes. You know, they always get tricked into stuff because white folks feel that this is their country. Again, not all white folks feel that it's their country and everybody else is infringing on their territory. Then they throw God on the table. God said we can enslave black people. It's in the Bible. You know, talking about Ham and Cain and Abel and all them. That goes back to you asked me earlier about the preacher twisted stuff. Well, Manifest Destiny says that we could take this land from Native Americans. They're not using it properly. They always got to hustle, man. And to close with white supremacy, Dr. Kaba Kamina, can't remember his name, but he said, man, there's no such thing as white supremacy unless you make it. How you gonna be supreme and you got to keep telling everybody you supreme? Like my daddy would say, you're not in charge, you got to keep telling everybody you in charge. Mm-hmm. How you gonna be supreme if you got to kill, rape, burn, cheat, lie, steal to get stuff? You're not a supreme being is supreme. You know, so unless you buy into the white supremacy hustle, that's what keeps it alive. Because I believe it. Yeah. I believe you supreme. So I didn't tell that to Gordon because he was a lot bigger than me, and I can't win a fair fight. I can't win a fair fight now. I got to sucker punch somebody, but I had to get on the plane. But that just goes back, man. I know I'm bouncing over the place, but that just closes my thought process up about reading. Read, understand, do your research. Some of these kids may be able to come up with some new ideas, but they just, man, history class. Oh man, I'm here about George Washington Carver, slavery, and I'm tired of you black folks asking for stuff all the time. Why y'all crying? The Irish were slaves, they wasn't crying, but the Irish weren't treated inhumanely. So, again, man, I'm just glad you guys gave me this forum. I know I've been talking a bunch of crazy stuff, but you get that bug, man. You read something and it's a lot of connecting the dots. How come Adam and Eve ain't portrayed as black people? Garden of Eden's in Africa, it says Cush in the Bible, Genesis. Why Eve got long black hair? I mean long blonde hair, and Adam looked like Jack LaLanne and whatnot. I don't get it. I don't get it, man. Yeah. And that's all they feed us. They feed us. And when the kids ask a question, teachers, like you said before, I can't talk about that. So the color of history, which is my curriculum, circumvents that, because I don't just talk about black people. I give the students facts, Let them discuss and draw their own conclusions. And if somebody says, I don't believe it, Mr. Blunt, well, that's cool. I get you. I'm not going to force you, but at least you got the facts, and that's how you interpreted them.
Yeah. You know, Burf and I, that's great. Burf and I have talked about this before. You know, you start looking at the civil rights era, right? That wasn't a long time ago.
No.
It was not a long time ago at all.
You know, for me, I was in elementary school.
Yeah, you know, and when you look at it, right, Malcolm X was militant. He was outspoken, and he was assassinated. Martin Luther King was peaceful in protest. He was assassinated, right? And you look at things like the Million Man March, you look at the sit-ins, you look at, you know, even like Black Panthers, you look at all of these different ways that black folks have tried to combat racism, and this doesn't work. Well, let's try this. Well, this doesn't work. And there's some that say that it's never going to work, right? We've had these conversations man, how do you truly become equal? And you have so much wisdom. You've lived through that era. You saw it. You saw it on the TVs. You know, German shepherds, you know, biting people and water hoses and all of this stuff. And my question to you is, how do we make it better? I know it's loaded, but I mean, how do we make it better?
Well, Birthright hit on it earlier. Economics got to get it done, because power never gets enough power. If you want power and profit, you can never have enough. It's just insatiable. And what does that turn into? That turns into to chaos. You know, chaos and instability. These folks have power. They all want more power. But I got out of high school in '69. Which means the civil rights movement, which is 55 to 65, which is the known civil rights movement. I was just getting to high school in 1965. So I benefited from a lot of these folks. And I tell these kids in school today, y'all in school sleeping, you know folks died, so white folks and black folks and Latinos and Asians can sit in class together? No, man, that's crazy. Why? They don't even get it. They're not being taught history. If you don't tell the whole story, it's not history. It's just a story. And Malcolm X said, it is a fool who lets his enemy teaches his kids. And I'm like, wow, that makes sense. So all I can do is give these kids information, facts, tell them, look it up. You can interpret it the way you want. Let's talk about it. Whatever decision you come up with, that's your decision. I think that's right now the best way. Because my daddy said the Black Panther movement, the civil rights movement, was a certain group going a certain distance. He said, that is a movement. You got to have a revolution to make some changes. And I thought he was crazy at the time. But all this marching, what happened to Black Lives Matter march? They had the National Guard, the Army, they had the Air Force, they had the prison extraction team. You know, they had everybody out there, you know, for a peaceful march. Yeah. And then at the insurgency at the Capitol, they had nobody. Nobody.
That's true.
So again, I'll close on that. It's a fool who expects his enemy to educate his children.
But on that, just to close up, yes, it does. It is a fool who lets their enemy. But when you have all the resources, they don't need to teach nobody. We can look it up for ourselves.
Correct.
So I think one thing that we should implore on all of our kids and everybody is that you find it for yourself. Find it for yourself. And once you have it, nobody can take it. Once you know where you've been, then it's a roadmap to where you can go. And because we don't know where we've been, because we're looking at the whatever we're learning in history, because we don't know where we've been, we have no direction on where we can go or where we're going.
Saturday mornings, we need to get YouTube or whatever it is every Saturday morning for a half an hour, have some instructions so parents and teachers ain't got to deal with that in the classroom. Turn on the color history Saturday, get some real history. Ain't got to worry about the classroom, you know, helping researchers. That's how we got to do. We got to use this social media. We need some kind of hook. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe have Beyonce tell them.
Right. Right. And you know, and a lot of stuff is how it's being taught. Because even if you're teaching the stuff, if it's not being presented in the way that the kids understand, because unfortunately the way we were taught, the kids don't learn like that now. So we gotta listen to once again another podcast, but we need to really focus on their learning styles to make sure that they can learn this stuff. Because if we're just saying it, that doesn't mean that they're listening to it.
Yeah, that's powerful. And as we, we're going to end how we started, and we started by saying the African proverb, right? Until the lion has his own historian, right? The tale of the hunt will be glorified by the hunter.
Correct, man. I just appreciate you having me on, Brother Birthright. Appreciate you inviting me here. You can tell I'm pretty passionate about it.
Yeah. So for our guest, Jeffrey Birthright, and our esteemed guest of honor today, Dr. Carl Blunt, this is Josiah Gano of the All Things Performance Podcast. Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.